But let's take you to this now. The South African Weather Service has warned of potential severe weather in parts of KwaZulu-Natal this coming weekend, urging residents to stay updated on alerts. Now, this comes after criticism of the Department of Co-operative Governance, a response to last weekend's storms, raising concerns about the region's preparedness. For more on this, let's now speak to Guy Midgley, Professor and Director of the School for Climate Studies at Stellenbosch University. Prof, thank you so much for your time. I mean, one can only, again, remember those scenes that we saw on the way to KwaZulu-Natal, and of course others trying to make their way back to Johannesburg, where people were stuck on the roads for more than 2 days. So just given the recent snowstorms and the subsequent flooding that we saw and the warnings that were given by the South African Weather Service in KwaZulu-Natal and in the Eastern Cape, and now more weather warnings from the Weather Service, how accurate then do you think these warnings are and should be in predicting extreme weather patterns?
Thanks for having me. Look, the weather's a complex system and it's difficult to predict, and the Weather Service will not always get it right. But I think one needs to err on the side of being more careful. And they got it right. They got it extremely right a few days ago. And if we'd had well joined up links between the Weather Service warning and disaster management and the police, etc., to help to reduce the traffic on the roads, maybe discourage people from using certain routes, for a day, maybe a day and a half, we could have avoided the death. And so I've commented on this before. I said we need to learn from these events quickly, and here we have another one right in front of us. So we will see if we learned anything from last week as we go forward. And as I say, they won't always get it right, but they are pretty good at these projections.
Yeah, and I mean, just on that, I wanted to say, if there are at all improvements that could be made here in terms of the forecasting to better prepare, because we've seen, of course, the criticism that was also leveled at the disaster management in terms of their response when responding to such forecasting.
Look, disaster management is a very difficult thing to do because you essentially waiting for events to happen. So it's not so easy, and every event is different. It's in a different area, requires different responses. It is one of the most difficult and challenging things to get right. But with climate change more and more on our horizon, we have to learn how to do much better.
And I'm glad you raised that point, because the next question then is, to what extent, can the increase in these severe weather patterns be attributed to climate change, or are there more specific climate patterns in the country making these events even more severe?
Well, I'd like to answer that question by saying that there's no single climate event occurring today that is not in some way affected by human impact on the climate. We've added so much greenhouse gas into the atmosphere, so much more energy, that every single climate event has been affected. There's nothing that's not affected. The question is how much and to what extent are these extreme events being made worse? Now, to answer that question, you need pretty good science, and that science is needed if we are going to be claiming for compensation from the international community. And what you need for that is excellent weather services to be able to do the tracing of the weather events that justify your claims. So that investing in weather services is going to give us all this capacity to claim these losses and damages.
I would imagine then, Prof, this is where collaboration probably plays a very important role. So how then can coordination between the South African Weather Service, disaster management, and in the form, of course, of the Department of COGTA, as well as, of course, local governments be improved to ensure that, of course, that we see better response and also, systems that are implemented that actually do work?
That's a great question. Government is not naturally structured in a way that would create this joined-up thinking. Government is created in a hierarchical fashion where you have a head of a unit, then you've got people reporting to that person, people reporting to those people. So you end up with these, what we often call silos or pyramids of people who aren't really able to talk to each other at the same level. And that's really what's got to start happening, because the heads of the units, are often too busy with major issues and aren't doing the cross-linkage. The cross-linkage has got to happen at a lower level, but then that creates problems because, you know how restrictive government is with regard to control. It's all about command and control. And that's kind of suicidal in a world of climate change. We've got to break down these barriers and create these cross-linkages. So if they are more natural, they're co-naturally, they're okay. Okay.
Prof, your line's not coming out as clearly, but I want to squeeze this last point in. And just having listened to what you're saying, particularly in as far as the threat of climate change is concerned, but just looking at KwaZulu-Natal specifically, in as far as long-term planning is concerned, I mean, what is needed there, to mitigate some of these effects that we are currently seeing of these disasters? Because, I mean, that province alone over the next, over the few couple of years has been really impacted by climate change and also some disasters.
Well, their processes are underway, mostly actually, a lot of them driven by universities and scientists to try and encourage this kind of joined-up thinking. But that's what's got to start happening. And we've got to try and break down these silos and create the right sort of communication channels. So we've got to involve scientists, universities, academics, practitioners, specialists, and practitioners on the ground, local people, and weather services who are providing the information. Because we've got to understand the whole picture, and each one of these groups that are part of the puzzle. But we don't have a good way of putting the puzzle together. Our country doesn't even have a climate change strategy in the research space. So there are a lot of holes, there are a lot of gaps that need to fill quickly, very, very quickly.
That is very concerning, and particularly in terms of that strategy that's so much needed, Prof. But thank you so much for your time. Really do appreciate it. Professor Guy Midgley there, of course, he is the professor and director of the School for Climate Studies at Stellenbosch University.